This is Matthew McConaughey.
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson.
Michael Ian Black.
And you are listening to
Five Questions
with Dan
Schawbel.
Welcome to Five Questions, Dana.
Thanks for having me, Dan. It's exciting to be here.
In your book, you detail your quarter-life crisis and explain that people today experience it over a longer period of time into their 30s, which I completely agree with. How did you overcome your quarter-life crisis to successfully pursue a long-term career in politics and in the media?
Yeah, so it's interesting about the quarter-life crisis. When I first wrote about it and The Good News Is, I thought that I was the only person that had really gone through that. And then I realized, oh no, every young woman is going through that. And maybe young men too, frankly. But I tend to see it more in women, and I mentor more young women. And in the last 6 years or so, I've noticed that those feelings of, have I made the wrong career choice? I'm not meeting anybody that I want to have a long-term relationship with. Maybe I'm not living in the right city. I'm not getting a chance to do anything that I really wanted to do. That was happening around 24, 25 for people. But now I feel like that's been going on now for a few years. And it really concerns me because I feel like that is robbing people of life's joys. And one of the things I think is the best way to deal with it is to, first of all, realize you're not alone. Everybody is going through it. So talk to people and talk about how they've gotten through it. Secondly, is that the more we try to plan our lives out, the less likely it is that it's actually going to turn out that way. So you have to let go of the plan. You have to make good personal decisions, but you have to let go of the plan a little bit and start to see your life in a way that is not so rigid, and be very open-minded. And the other thing is, I think you have to figure out a way to be a bright star wherever you are, so that your light has to shine brightly no matter what you're doing. And that takes focus and discipline, but there's freedom in that. And that eventually you start to realize that you don't have to be in crisis mode all the time.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And I think two of the other culprits are technology. Everyone has the fear of missing out. And so we continue to live these lives where we're trying to live up to the standards of society or friends or influencers or celebrities. And then Disney films. Disney films make it seem like everything has to be happily ever after in this perfect story. And we obsess about the story we tell ourselves, our parents and friends about our situation and the people we're with.
I think Hallmark Channel as well, and even Bravo, right? Reality TV. I think all of that is definitely true. And on technology, I think a great experiment is to just set it aside for a week, and you realize you're really not missing that much. You're gaining a lot more in terms of your time back.
Absolutely. And people have women especially have disproportionately suffered from employment perspective during COVID. Actually, over the past year, about 3 million women have dropped out of the US workforce during COVID. And, it's because of caregiving demands for the most part. That's what the research says. What is your advice to women on how they can rebound from this crisis and get back to work?
So it's a great question. So I started writing this book, Everything Will Be Okay, before COVID. Okay. Because I was talking about the quarter-life crisis, but now I realize that it's like the right book at the right time. One of the things that's happened because of COVID for women in particular is that, one, a lot of women work in the service industry. So if you were in hospitality or restaurants, or maybe you had a spa, I think it was your dream to open a spa, and then you did, and then the government has to shut it down because of COVID. But the main reason that a lot of women have left the workplace is those jobs, the hospitality jobs and the service jobs have kind of gone away, but also because so many kids are not able to be in school full time, it does often fall to the mother to be more of the caretaker of the children. And so for a lot of children, especially if they're young, they can't just sit and be expected to be on a Zoom call all day long and paying attention. And you have to actually have a parent sitting there with them. So that's why a lot of women have left. I have a girlfriend named Michelle Chase, and I interview her in the book. I think she's just she's one of those people that I look at and say, how does she do it? I asked her some of these things. And one of the pieces of advice she has is that whether you're in this situation where you've lost your job during COVID, or you had to leave your job in order to take care of the children, or even, let's say COVID isn't happening, and you are going to take some time off to raise young babies until you're ready to go back to work. She recommends that every young woman have an LLC, like start their own business, because that will show you that you do not have a big gap in your resume in terms of employment, right? And it means that you can take on as many projects as you want. You might be super busy. You might not have that many, but as long as you have that document, it's good for you to stay busy. It's also good for tax purposes and also for future employment reasons. I don't know if that makes sense. Like
I love that. I've never heard that piece of
smart.
advice before, ever. And I mean, I have an LLC, and I think that women, it's also about independence too, and the psychology that comes with having a business, whether it's making, you know, 10,000 a year or 100,000 a year. It's knowing that you have something and that you're building something and working towards a goal or goals. So I think that is really, really fascinating. Yeah, it's empowering, and it feels like you're in charge, and you can be independent.
Also, it's not that hard to do. Yeah. If you look up like LLC, I think in New Jersey, somebody was telling me, it's like, maybe might have been Washington, D.C. I think it was $220 for all the paperwork to be signed so that you have your LLC. So that's an investment worth making.
Absolutely. And continuing on this topic of inequality, last year, women made only 81 cents for every dollar a man made. And this was a study by PayScale. What role do men have in supporting women's career as we strive for gender pay equality? And I think this is especially good for you because with your book, people might think it's just meant for women, but it's a team game, right? As a society, men have to also help women in taking off more of the load to support them. So what are your comments on this?
Well, a couple of things. I think generationally, that's starting to change. You have companies like, for example, Salesforce that looked into its pay scales and realized, oh my gosh, even we here have inequities. And so they're trying to deal with that. Now, there are some reasons that like risk factors when it comes to a job that more men do than women. Sometimes that explains that. But I also think women are doing better across the board when it comes to earning graduate degrees, starting businesses, becoming lawyers. They're graduating at a higher rate than men. Like a lot of things are starting to happen for women at this rate that like, kind of maybe even worryingly to demographers, women are doing so well. But women also have to stick up for themselves. They have to figure out a way to talk to people. One of the things I did in this book is I spoke to Lydia Finette, someone you also might want to talk to. She wrote a book called The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. Do you know that book?
I haven't heard of it, no.
So it's a great book. And she works at Christie's, the auction house. And she said she did not grow up comfortable talking about money, but that she got comfortable over time talking about money. And she said, you actually have to do more research. You have to ask people, ask your friends. You have to find out what people are being paid so that you can advocate for yourself and try to get the same amount. So I think that her advice is a good one. And then to your point about men in this book. So my husband, Peter, he shows up a lot in the book all throughout. And because he's been so supportive of me, I couldn't have done any of this without him. But he says he thinks that men should read the book because if they do, they'll realize that they will never fully understand women. He said, wow, you guys think a lot. But what I'm hoping is that managers of young women will read the book so that they can understand those anxieties and the desires, the different competing pressures that are going on in anybody's life. And also dads. So dads have a really important influence on their daughters' lives. And sometimes I think that they don't know quite how to help. And sometimes a dad's help can actually be adding pressure or maybe making things more difficult. And I think that there's some advice in here that everybody could take away and just try to make everyone feel a little bit more serene and joyous about the fact that, you know, we get to live here in America.
Yeah, and I'm that's very hopeful, and I think really important as well, because there are now female breadwinners in homes, and that would be unheard of in my grandfather's generation.
This is absolutely true. Like I think it's like 51 or 52% now.
Yeah, and it is true that women are more educated. But
Well, and
but
I
they did suffer more from a mental health standpoint than men, but men were more likely to die over the past year from COVID. So that's an interesting relationship as well.
It is so interesting what COVID has done to make people really think about their lives, and sometimes in a really good way, right? Like maybe being able to step back. I know this is true in my own life. I think a lot of people think I'm a big extrovert, but when I had time to when I was able to cancel all dinners and all parties and everything, and I just got to stay home and shut it down a little bit and quiet myself, I felt healthier mentally. I slept better. My back didn't hurt as much, like my upper back, in terms of all of that tension. I had more time to do some yoga and stretching, and I realized I was running myself a little ragged. So I have a responsibility to do a better job on that front.
Yeah, but I think what was really smart of what you did and what I did early on in the pandemic is I said to myself, I'm not a woman, I'm not pregnant, I don't have kids. Let me speak to people who are in these unique situations so I can better empathize and understand what they're going through, because it gives you a more holistic view of the different various variations, because everyone has their own unique life circumstances during COVID. But I'd love to go back to what you said early on in the interview about mentoring and how important it is to you, because I'm passionate about mentoring, but I feel like a lot of people have this completely wrong. They walk around and say, just almost like passing out business cards, will you be my mentor? Will you be my mentor? Can I pick your brain? And that seems to be very ineffective, as you probably realize, but I'm sure, mentored a lot of people and have been mentored, because that's typically how it works, especially in your field, which is super competitive. So it's good to have supporters. Can you give an example of a successful mentoring relationship you had and how both parties benefited?
Well, sure. I mean, I started Minute Mentoring with some girlfriends of mine in 2010. I think, yeah, 2010. And the idea was, whenever I was doing any sort of mentoring after I left the White House, I found that every young woman was asking me the same questions. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could just answer these all at once, all together? Because women have the same concerns, same worries, same hopes in a lot of cases. Obviously, people are individuals, but for the most part. But I found that a lot of my mentors were organic. It wasn't like a formal relationship where I said, will you be my mentor? And yes, and we set up a time every week to meet, because somebody who you want to be your mentor doesn't have time to meet with you all the time. So I had a chief of staff when I worked on Capitol Hill named Holly Probst. She had been an intern to the press secretary, to the legal side. She got her law degree while she was working full time. She became the chief of staff to the congressman I worked for. And she would do all sorts of things for me. First of all, I had never been a press secretary before. So she would let me sit in and listen to her while she did an interview with a reporter, so I could hear how she would answer questions. I do that here for people sometimes. The other thing she did is she would blind copy me on emails to reporters so that I could see, how is she framing this? How is she writing this, right? Because if no one teaches you, you just are sort of floundering. And she also gave me some good advice about briefing the congressman, which I then took to the White House. And that was, you always want to leave on a high note. So that when you go in to see the boss, it's never really because you have great news. Maybe that's like once every 10 times. You go in to say, there's a problem. And hopefully you say, this is how I've addressed the problem. We have 2 additional problems on top of that, but I have a plan to deal with them. And the good news is, whatever it is, she said, always try to leave on a high note, because it shows that you have a plan, and that gives your supervisor some confidence and comfort in your abilities. And it also shows that you take ownership of the issue. And the third reason is, she said, if you leave on a high note, they'll want to see you again in the future.
What I love about what you just said, though, earlier, is that she gave you exposure. She said, hey, I'm going to forward you, an email from, a journalist. I'm going to put you in a room. It wasn't like she said, hey, let's spend 4 hours together. She wanted you to do some of the work too. And I think that's what's so smart about it, is she gave you the exposure to open your eyes to see, how people correspond and to be near powerful people in a sense. But you had to do some of that work to educate yourself through those situations. And that's very smart of her.
I remember one time in particular, she sent me in her place to a meeting, and she told me, like, here's my position. and you've got to go there, and I want you to be the eyes and ears, take notes. And I'm a very good note taker. It's a really important thing to do as you work your way up. And right before I left, she said, and by the way, I'm sending you there for a reason. I don't expect you to be a little mouse and sit there and just be quiet and have great ideas or concerns that you don't voice until you get back here. She said, so you have to go and own your right to be at the table. I'm sending you in my place. And I write about that too, that managers really do need to allow their underlings, right, or their employees to have FaceTime with the boss. And I believe that managers should be judged on whether or not they can promote their people.
Yes. It's almost like they have to push their ego aside and say, hey, I need to invest in this person. I can't just expect them to perform every day. It's got to be mutual. And I think that's the crux of mentoring, is it's not one-sided.
Absolutely.
And so by you being in that room, if you say something that's really smart, you make her look good as well. And she benefits. So it goes both ways. And what's your best piece of career advice?
This is a great question. I know you asked this question. It's when you write a book of advice, like, how do you pick one thing out? I think it's this, that you have to become the most resilient you. That means that you are the one that can take on more assignments. You can deal with disappointments. You can have grace and dignity when dealing with a crisis. That you want to be the one that everybody turns to when they think, what are we going to do now? You want to be that person. You want to be the most resilient you, because that will not only help you in the workplace, but also in your personal life. So if I had to pick one thing, it would be resiliency. And if anything that this past year and the COVID has taught us is that we are resilient, but there are cracks that you can fall through. So you have to be disciplined, make very good personal decisions, and you can find that place of serenity and joy, which is what I think that is meant for all of us. But we get ourselves too worked up. But the more resilient you are, the more you're going to be able to enjoy your life, and you'll be a lot more successful.
It's true. And this isn't the last crisis. This isn't probably not the last pandemic. And so get these skills now. Learn how to deal with a crisis and adapt to change and get new skills and stay connected with the people you care about. Get those skills now, because you're going to have them in the future as we encounter more obstacles and turmoil.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I wake up every day feeling like I knew less than the day before, that I'm in a race to learn more, learn new skills. I just found out yesterday that we're not even supposed to use emojis anymore, or the same emojis, because the young people don't like those emojis. And I'm like, well, I better find out what the new emojis are. I got to stay up with the times.
But that's also a good point, because, there's a whole new generation, and they're not waiting for you to adapt. You need to figure out how they operate and behave and cater to them in some respect. And we can learn something from people who don't look like us, who are different ages. And I think that's important too. Men and women can learn from each other. So diversity has never been more important. I mean, recently, the Walgreens has a new CEO, an African-American woman. So that, the glass ceiling starting to break. People are starting to see people not just like you, but like at the top of corporate America being successful and having these positions, which will inspire them. And in government.
It's an exciting time. It's a challenging time, but it's exciting too. There's some really wonderful scientific and technological breakthroughs that are going to help cure diseases and make life a little bit more convenient for people. But there's also, concerns about how do we bring everybody along on this journey together. So I'm committed to that. I wake up every day thinking I have a lot to learn, and I do.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the conversation, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all you do.